When we think of the age of exploration, we usually get this picture of heroic adventurers, right? Setting sail for glory and discovery. But what if that whole story has it backward? What if Europe wasn't running towards some grand new world, but was actually running from an absolute catastrophe that had shattered its own? To get this, we have to start with one staggering number. This is the number that changes absolutely everything. 25 million. Between 1347 and 1353, the Black Death wiped out 1/3 of Europe's entire population. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. It was a collapse on a scale that's almost unimaginable, and it kicked off a crisis that would shape the next 400 years of world history. So let's get this one thing straight. The famous voyages of Columbus, of Vasco da Gama, these weren't born out of some noble quest for knowledge. No way. They were a desperate, panicked scramble to deal with a continent-wide economic meltdown. This whole era starts not with curiosity, but with crisis management that eventually spiraled into global exploitation. Okay, so to really understand why Europe's ruling class panicked so hard, we need to take a quick look at the world they were trying to hold together before the plague came and just shattered it to pieces. It's really easy to forget this, but back in the 1300s, Europe was, well, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a global power, it was just this messy collection of hundreds of little bickering kingdoms. You compare that to the huge unified empires in China or the Middle East, and Europe was politically divided, technologically lagging, and frankly, pretty weak economically.
And they were totally dependent on stuff they couldn't make themselves. Think about it. Spices from Asia? That wasn't just a luxury for fancy food. Before refrigeration, spices were how you kept meat from going bad. It was essential. Silk from China was the ultimate status symbol. And gold, the very basis of their money, was running out. Their own mines were nearly tapped out.
And here was the real kicker. They couldn't get any of these goods directly. The trade routes were all controlled by powerful Muslim empires who acted as the middlemen. So by the time a bag of pepper got to a market in London, its price had been marked up 10, 20, sometimes 100 times. Europe was at the very end of the supply chain, paying a fortune for everything. And then, this happened. A few trading ships pull into port in Sicily. They aren't just carrying cargo. They're carrying the single greatest disaster in European history. The plague didn't just kill people. It completely broke the fragile economic system that was already on shaky ground. You see, the death of 25 million people isn't just a human tragedy, it's an economic earthquake. It triggered a crisis that turned the entire social order completely upside down. Before the plague, it was simple. Too many people, not enough work. Lords had all the power, peasants were tied to the land, and wages were laughably low. After the plague, the whole game flipped. All of a sudden, workers were a scarce resource, and the ones who survived, they had leverage. They could actually demand more money and better treatment. And the result was immediate. It was huge. In places like England, wages for regular labor didn't just go up a little bit, they doubled, sometimes even tripled, practically overnight. Now imagine you're a landowner. Your whole world is built on cheap labor. This wasn't just a problem, it was a full-blown catastrophe. So what did the elites do? They do what elites always do when they're losing control. They try to make a law against reality. They passed laws like the Statute of Laborers in England, literally making it illegal to ask for a raise. And of course, it failed, hard. You can't just pass a law to fix a massive labor shortage. And that desperation, right there, is the engine for everything that happens next. And the hits just kept on coming. First, the plague kills 1/3 of their workforce. Then, their attempt to control wages completely backfires. And then, the knockout blow. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquers Constantinople. And just like that, the main land route to Asia is slammed shut. So now, Europe's elites are completely cornered. Their labor is expensive, their gold is gone, and their trade routes are cut. This perfect storm of crises didn't lead to some great rethinking of their society at home. Nope. It led to a frantic, desperate push outward to find new sources of wealth. Wealth that they could control directly.
And this is where we have to completely rethink people like Prince Henry of Portugal, the guy they call the navigator. Forget the image of a curious scholar staring at maps. He was a 15th century venture capitalist, plain and simple. He was funding these risky sea voyages for one reason, a return on investment. And that investment was all about finding a direct route to West African gold.
See, Portugal was in a tight spot. It was blocked on land by its much bigger neighbor, Spain. The only direction it could expand was out into the Atlantic Ocean. And while they talked a lot about religious missions, the real prize, the driving force behind it all, was finding a way to get around the North African traders and tap directly into West Africa's legendary gold reserves. And they weren't exactly subtle about it. In 1482, they built their first major forge in what's now Ghana. And what do they call it? Saint-Georges de Mina, St. George of the Mine. They literally put mine in the name. It was an extraction post from day one. So what started as a hunt for gold quickly turned into something else. The Portuguese were building the infrastructure, the ships, the forts, the sea routes, that would soon be used for a far more horrifying kind of trade. Now, this is a really important distinction to make. Slavery did exist in Africa before Europeans arrived, but it was a fundamentally different system. It was often based on debt or being a prisoner of war. It wasn't always for life, and crucially, it wasn't based on race. The system the Portuguese were inventing was new. It was chattel slavery. It defined people as property for life based on their race, a status that your children would inherit. Get this date in your head, 1444. That's almost 50 years before Columbus even sails. In 1444, the first major documented auction of enslaved Africans happens in Lagos, Portugal. The transatlantic slave trade doesn't start in the Americas. It starts in Europe, driven by European demand. So by the late 1400s, before anyone in Europe really knew the Americas existed, the whole machine was already built. The Portuguese had the ships, the forts along the African coast, the navigation skills, and, most chillingly, they had begun to normalize the idea of trafficking human beings across an ocean for profit. The whole system was just sitting there, ready and waiting for the massive demand that was about to explode from the New World. So why does it matter to reframe history this way? Because what we're looking at here isn't a one-time thing. It's the blueprint. It's the model for colonial extraction that Europe would use again and again all over the world for the next 400 years. And you can see the pattern. This 5-step playbook. Step 1, a crisis back home makes the ruling class desperate. Step 2, they look overseas to extract wealth to solve their domestic problems. Step 3, they run into complex, sophisticated societies. Step 4, they use a technological advantage, like cannons on ships, to force an unequal relationship. And finally, step 5, they invent ideologies, usually based on religion or race, to justify the whole brutal process. And that, right there, is the most important takeaway. This system, this machine that was built out of desperation back in the 15th century, it becomes self-perpetuating. Once it's up and running, it doesn't just stop. It just keeps looking for new resources to consume and new people to exploit. Which really leaves us with one last pretty challenging question. This whole pattern was born from a response to a crisis. So, when our world faces crises today, whether they're economic, environmental, social, do we look for real, equitable solutions here at home? Or do we just repeat the pattern and find someone somewhere else to pay the price?